Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Congressman Pat Ryan with us today. We'll talk with Pat in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So let's talk with Congressman Pat Ryan, who represents Upstate New York's 18th Congressional District. Congressman, welcome back into the back room.
Thanks for having me back.
So,
in a minute.
There's so much going on, but I want to start with how many Americans are concerned, some even terrified, about the changes taking place under the new Trump administration. What can you say to assure them that their worst fears won't be realized?
I mean, I wish I could say I feel that I could guarantee that they won't be realized, but I don't necessarily feel that way, to be perfectly candid. Mm-hmm. I mean, here I'm going to work my ass off and fight with everything I've got. But look, I've been thinking a lot about this. We've all been thinking about this. It's sort of, there's so many sort of fronts to fight on and be concerned about and be focused on that it is easy to lose focus or lose even discipline, maybe, I think is a good word. So I do think we have to be strategic. As I'll think about it from my House perspective, we got 215 House Democrats. We are actually really working to identify sort of whose lanes are where, how do we play defense as a team, number one, and sort of priority one is protect from harm. And then priority two is how do we get on the offense in terms of both policy and moving forward good legislation where we can, but also narrative offense in terms of outlining a vision for the country that is different than certainly the president and gives people energy and optimism and hope and positivity when that feels almost impossible, I know right now, but I still very much believe that is possible and necessary. So it's early days of that. And I think this is an armyism, so bear with me. There's a few levels of warfare. There's strategic, which is sort of the macro level, operational, which is kind of the middle, and then tactical, which is that day-to-day. And there's a term I learned as a young Army officer, which is called tactical patience, which means sometimes you have to, at the daily level, have patience to let the situation develop a little bit, knowing that the goal is to maintain strategic initiatives. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. That may not be comforting, but I feel like we're going to win the day. It's going to be really tough.
So that kind of bleeds a little bit into what was going to be my next question. What do you say to the tens of millions of Americans who just every day now have this sinking feeling that either democracy is dead or it's dying? Is that hyperbole? I mean, I have my own mixed feelings on that, but we have dark days, but are they that dark?
I think we're going to have some dark days. I don't at all think democracy is dead. I think I actually think what's happening here in the country is we have to re-argue and reaffirm, and in many cases actually reconvince fellow Americans, what do we actually mean when we say democracy? I mean, I actually think Trump has successfully, and the MAGA movement, attacked so many of the founding things that we used to take for granted and were articulated in our Constitution. And we just, I think, as a collective party, Democrats and others too, just assume that everybody took those for granted. And in fact, many people don't. And in particular, when I think people are feeling the economic pain and pressure that they're feeling right now in the country, which is unprecedented, at least in the last century, it's very hard to ask anyone to focus on anything else that feels even theoretical or higher order in terms of principles and values and norms and the Constitution and institutions, when literally you can't put fucking food on the table and afford your rent or your mortgage. And that's what Trump has attacked and manipulated. So we have to both solve the immediate economic pain and make the case that democracy is by far the best form of government and show that it actually works. I mean, to me, the answer goes back to my time as county executive, where we showed at a local level that you can actually make government work for the good and for the collective good. And we have to redo that. And in many cases, we failed to do that, especially in Democratic-led states on many dimensions, frankly.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on this a few minutes ago. Well, can you give us an example of what the party is doing to protect our rights?
Well, the party is not a thing. I mean, I think no one, just being very candid today.
Well, Congress.
No one should count on the Democratic Party to do a thing. We've lost multiple times now, and I think the party's totally out of touch. And that's another conversation, which I'm happy to have. I think in terms of what the Congress should do and what each representative should do, like I talked about, I had my swearing in this weekend. I talked about it. My mission statement is make the Hudson Valley more affordable, more safe, and more free. And so every decision and vote and thing I talk about and thing I don't talk about is oriented around freedom as a core principle. So I think having that as a freedom and rights as an orienting mindset when we're talking about things, when we're trying to persuade folks who just voted for Trump or who didn't vote to kind of get on the team, I do think it's important to orient it that way. I do think people should take a little bit of comfort, a small amount of comfort in knowing that because of how tight the House margin is, specifically, tighter than even the last Congress, it's essentially 1 to 2 or 3 vote difference. That is actually, I mean, obviously the majority would give us much more power to stop bad things, but just the tightness of the margin and the dysfunction of the Republicans, I didn't appreciate this before being down here. That allows us a lot of leverage to stop or at least slow bad things. Doesn't feel great to be on defense again, but we I think will be effective at stopping some of the most egregious pieces that they might, at least legislatively, try to push.
Yeah, and that last statement you just made, at least legislatively, dovetails into my next question, because you're right. There is a very slim margin, and that gives Democrats a lot of leverage and some measure of power. We've seen that already in the last several weeks. But then there's the other stuff that we've seen in Trump's first week, which is all these executive orders. We've seen him issue a blizzard of EOs, and everything from immigration and birthright citizenship to withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement to exiting the World Health Organization. Some of this is obviously very impactful. But overall, with these executive orders, how much do you think this is just performative bluster, I can do whatever I want, I have this magic pen? But at the end of the day, how much will be actually implemented? And in your opinion, what specifically?
Well, I mean, a lot of these were symbolic. I mean, a lot of them were sort of more for messaging purposes, but there are some obviously very substantive, incredibly damaging, and in many cases undemocratic, all the democratic and big democratic things that they're doing and trying to do here. I think the flood of 200 plus executive orders is a perfect example or microcosm of the challenge and dilemma we face of, amidst all that, like, what do we focus on, both in our sort of legislative and using the official tools we have to stop, and what do we talk about and message on in terms of winning back the day and winning back voters who allowed us to get into the situation in the first place. On the process side of it, and as you said, there are lawsuits already filed. There's a lot of ways to challenge and slow these down. And so I think actually a lot of that is happening and will continue to happen and is very important. And I'm involved in multiple of those. I'm especially focused on us winning back sort of the battle of ideas here. And so to me, we should be very disciplined. And like I was very strategic this week, or tried to be anyway, in terms of which EOs we talked about. And I talked about specifically the linkage between an executive order rescinding legislation and action to lower prescription drug costs and hold big pharma accountable at the same time as you see who was sitting in the front row of Trump's inauguration in front of his own cabinet. Literally the richest, most powerful elites in the history, or modern history anyway, arguably the history of our country ever, are in the front row. And it's so obvious, I think, that many of these executive actions and many of what the other things he's going to try to do are to benefit the wealthy, powerful few, while the rest of us get even more harmed. That, to me, is the winning message. That's where I think Democrats lost a huge swath of working class and middle class people, and where Trump will show his truest colors, and where we can persuade people back to our side.
Now, on paper, I agree with you 100,000,000%, because that should be not only the message, but that should be the reaction from at least part of his base. His base basically is anyone who voted for him. Do we need to win over 77 million people? No. If we actually can win over 3 million, then we win everything again. The biggest question is, what do you do to really reach these people, to speak with them on their level, on their terms, and make them understand that Democrats don't have billionaires sitting in the front row, right, when they do anything. It's the working class. So how do we get them back to and have them see that reality?
Yeah. Of the 77-ish million people who voted for him, all of them are certainly not his base. I'd say it's, 60 to 70% of them would be base, meaning like they're kind of with you no matter what, or almost no matter what. And, same for folks who voted for Biden. There's a huge set of folks who literally probably made their decision in the final minutes, hours, days, or maybe weeks of the campaign, who are absolutely persuadable and who we failed to provide a better alternative than Donald freaking Trump, which is pathetic. And we should own a good amount of that as a party, in my personal opinion, which goes to the second half of your question, which is how do we win folks back? We have to stop trying to do everything for everyone all the time and focus on a set of widely, broadly popular, I would argue populist, actually, things that connect with not just Democrats, but everyone, many of them being around affordability and the economy, and have some message discipline to stick to those. And when other things come up that are frustrating or infuriating or tempting or need to be fought, we can fight them, but our messaging has to be consistent and disciplined on middle class and working class economic issues, and drawing the contrast of we are and have been the party of the people, and they are the party of the elites and the rich and powerful. And we got to be willing to call out the villains in who the rich and powerful are that are harming us. I was just at a hearing with the Rail Association, who's tried to block this rail safety legislation for 2 years since the East Palestine derailment in Ohio. And it's a perfect, just in my mind, example of bipartisan bill to make railways more safe. And by the way, in our district, it's a huge issue on both, on your side of the river with Amtrak and MTA, but especially on the west side of the river with freight, where we have derailments and incidents on the regular basis that are fatal. And this is being blocked by rich and powerful railroad barons, essentially, like we had in the days of Teddy Roosevelt. So we got to pick those big fights that are broadly popular and populist and make sure we win them.
Yeah. And, interestingly, like metaphorically, when Trump moved his inauguration inside from the cold, it's the wealthy and the powerful who got the heat, and the little guys were out in the cold. Literally, like the metaphor couldn't have been. I just hope it doesn't get lost on these folks.
Well, and that's where I do think, for example, the pardoning of January 6th, folks, is un-American. It's a disgrace. It's deeply hypocritical of those that claim to be for the rule of law and standing with law enforcement. And there have been some powerful statements from even the Fraternal Order of Police, which is a very traditionally conservative.
They endorsed it. Yeah, they endorsed it.
So even they came out and had some words on that, which is incredibly rare and I think says a lot. But I think given limited, you understand this better than anybody, like in any communication environment, you just have only so many at-bats. And I think drawing the contrast around the economic message and the are you with us or are you with them, and them being Bezos, which Amazon doesn't pay a cent in corporate tax, and Zuckerberg, who wants to just further rot and poison our kids and our minds and the literal TikTok CEO owned by China, acknowledged as our biggest adversary. I mean, it's just, and it's all tied to Trump as someone who just craves power and money, and how un-American that is.
Well, he gave Democrats all the content for the ads. It's just a question, to your point, of how effectively they'll use them. Let's talk about the cabinet nominations. Who concerns you the most?
Ugh, it's an almost impossible question. I have focused my energy on, in terms of being on a team here, like on Pete Hegseth. One, because I am personally offended by him being the nominee, and for a few reasons I'm happy to talk about. But also because I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I'm a veteran. I'm one of the veterans in our party at the national level anyway. So I think I have an ability to uniquely talk about that one, or maybe actually a responsibility to uniquely talk about that one. But I'm very concerned about, in addition to him, certainly Tulsi Gabbard, who a lot of I think everybody understands the concerns there. Kash Patel, I think, could actually be the sort of sleeper of actually most dangerous, and right now less focused on anyway. But I even think, like, one that I don't think we're talking enough about, for example, on our point of economic populism and contrast, is Dr. Oz. So, he is going to control the healthcare and well-being, both access and cost, for a lot of things. But let's just take Medicare, for example, which 67 million Americans count on. And now you have a literal snake oil salesman in charge of administering that program, at the same time that most Republicans, the widely held Republican position in the House is, we should either raise the age or privatize or dilute the program, and certainly get rid of the recent provisions to bring down prescription drug costs, because they're all in the pocket of big pharma. I think we should be talking more about that one, for example, because it's less the Department of Defense is theoretical to most people, unfortunately. Medicare is real and visceral and affects people's lives. And I think that's a good example, too, of where what we choose to focus on maybe matters even more than what we say about it.
You're right on that, because I think that's where the rubber meets the road with a lot of these Republican voters or MAGA voters. I mean, I remember watching Jordan Klepper going to MAGA rallies and asking people, why are you here? Oh, because we're angry. Like an older couple. And what are you angry about? Oh, big government. You mean like Medicare and Social Security? Like, no, we love that. So my feeling is, you take away their Medicare, these MAGA people, take away their Medicare and fuck with their Social Security, that's when you're going to have maybe a decent chunk of them say, this is where I draw the line.
Well, and remember what happened in the first Trump administration, where we were in a similar period. I mean, it's different, but similar in that there was almost a breath or a hope that maybe Trump would tone down the rhetoric, and it was just rhetoric, and he wouldn't do a lot of these dangerous things. We obviously saw him do all these things. But the real Rubicon was when they tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, specifically for people with pre-existing conditions, which just like struck the collective nerve of like a deep un-American unfairness and injustice that mobilized the country. We will have some equivalent thing or things like that in the next few months, or probably 6 months, between the tax bill they're going to try to pass, which will further favor the wealthy and the well-connected, between trying to hurt Social Security, defund the VA, or go after Medicare and Medicaid, or some combination of those. Those are those broadly felt harms. And I think that's where we should be focusing our collective angst, at least on our messaging and sort of public focus. And then, of course, behind the scenes, we have to be fighting everything. And we are. I mean, for better or worse, Congress is set up where, like, you have the majority and the minority on every committee and in every functional area. We are fighting these battles as best as we can.
Mm-hmm. And what could the folks at home do these next 20, 21 months to ensure that you guys not only take the House, but that Democrats take the Senate as well?
Well, I think there's a few different levels to that. I'll give you sort of two pieces. And I would welcome anybody who wants to sort of get involved here in any way. Would love to get you looped into the work that we're doing on these fronts. One is there's a district to our south on the House map, which we flipped 4 New York seats from red to blue. It's a huge deal in the given what happened at the national level. We also did really well in our district, which I'm very proud of and appreciative to so many folks. New York 17, which is the district to our south, we should all sort of surge and gang up there on Mike Lawler, who pretends to be moderate but is not, and is either going to fight to hold that seat, which is critical to flipping the House, or might actually run for governor. He's talking about that. So we're going to start some collective work in the broader Hudson Valley area and the state to focus on flipping that seat. There will probably be a Democratic primary, I think, for the candidate. So even as that's going on, we want to get folks activated and energized around countering from the beginning Lawler. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, which is more uncomfortable, I've been doing this 3 years now at in this job and multiple hard campaigns now. And we really need to get out of our bubble. Like we got to figure out how at the individual level to hear from folks who don't agree with us politically. And I know this is almost cliche to say, but the alternate universes in which we're all living, the different news we get, the different folks we're talking to and not talking to, it's so stark in our own Hudson Valley community, because I'm out there every day kind of talking to everybody, and it really is like different planet almost that people are living on. And it's impossible to answer, I think, so many of your questions fully that you've asked, which are the right, smart questions, without really taking the time to actually listen to struggling folks who I think in their mind, for lack of any better option, voted again for Trump. And, many of them will be deeply, deeply harmed by things he's already done and will do. But I think what's really missing right now in the political discussion is increasingly the traditional labels of like, are you progressive or moderate? Are you liberal or conservative? Is actually not how folks are thinking about this. They're really thinking about it as like, are you for me, like us, like normal people just trying to live our lives? Or are you for them being the elite and powerful? And despite Trump being among the sort of oligarchy, he effectively channeled the voice of the people. But he has now invited those very oligarchs to sit in the front row. So the opportunity for us to win them back around that is there, but no one's going to hear that argument if we don't start with some like human to human, almost non-political trust to say, hey, like, can we just listen to each other about what's going on in our community? So that's a harder one to do, but I think a really important piece.
Congressman, thanks for coming on as always. Keep up the good fight. Talk soon.
Thanks for having me, and talk to you soon.
Alrighty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Lengyel. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.